Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Tuesday, August 3rd. We're breaking down this massive 15 game slate that we have over on DraftKings today. And I feel like I say this every single slate at this point, but once again, pitching is not that great today. Yes, there is some solid pitchers, but I wouldn't say the matchups are exactly that great. So hopefully, once again, we're just going to try to get by with our pitchers and win the slate with our bats. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. I'll be here all season long breaking down some baseball. Then we have NFL and NASCAR coming up very, very soon, which I'll be here pretty much every single day and week for that. And if you want to follow me over on social media, I'm at ChrisPenal16 on Twitter and CPen16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon and get access to some extra content, link is down below in the description for that. It's the beginning of the month, so it is one of the best times to sign up, and you can get access to projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, my data sheets, and I do update everything throughout the day. So if you want the entire spreadsheet, not just a few players I list here, you can find that in a link down below, and you can join the community with over a couple hundred people. And don't forget, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And if you look hard enough, you can find some pretty soft lines to take advantage of. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on PrizePicks, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. That's an instant deposit match up to $100. It's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you, either prizepicks.com or you can use the link down below. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And I know I said the pitching isn't that great today, but there is some good pitchers on this slate. I just wouldn't say I like the matchups here. Like Walker Buehler's facing a tough Houston team. Chaminade is playing San Diego. Kikuchi's playing Tampa. Like, some of these guys are in some pretty tough matchups here, but they're such talented pitchers where I think we can still roster them tonight. But we'll start up top with our ace of the slate. It's Walker Buehler, $10,900, by far the most expensive pitcher here, but I think he's a fine option. I will say I was playing around with some dummy lineups, and I was able to fit in Walker Buehler and Zach Wheeler lineups and still get the bats that I like, especially if you guys from Coors Field, which looks like a pretty good spot today. So it shouldn't be too hard to fit in what pitcher you want. Just depends on what kind of roster construction you're looking for today. But we'll start with Walker Buehler here. Tough matchup versus Houston. They're not a team that'll strike out too much. They have plenty of power, high WOBAs, low K rates, high walk rates. So it's kind of a scary spot here. But Walker Buehler the past month or so now has been playing some really good baseball. If you just look at the game logs, he's been scoring over like mid-20s each and every single start. Had a couple games in the 30s. And only 3.69 implied team total against him. He has a pretty heavy favorite here. The Dodgers offense looks pretty darn good. So I'm assuming he'll be a pretty heavy favorite almost every single time he's on the mound for the rest of the season. And a 7.5K prop. He's pitching at home. And if we're looking at his overall numbers on the year, a real nice 2.19 ERA. Now his xFIP and SIERA about running a half higher at 3.59 and 3.6, but still some pretty solid numbers. I wish his K rate was higher, because when you're paying nearly $11,000 for a pitcher, we want K rates like guys like Corbin Burns, Jacob deGrom, Freddie Peralta, but it's sitting at 26.6%, which is respectable. He does limit the power, limits the runs usually, has a lean to the ground ball, has low hard contact rate, less than 100 per 9, so I guess I can't complain too much, and it's not too bad pitching in LA, where the weather is usually nice and solid for pitching, and the park's not that bad either. But if we're looking at the splits for the Houston Astros versus right-handed pitching, like I said, this isn't going to look that great. They strike out less than 20% of the time, and you're 180 ISO, 117 WRC plus, and a 335 WOBA. If you're playing Walker Buehler tonight, you're just kind of betting on the talent, because raw points-wise, he's going to grade as one of the better pitchers on the slate. Now, I wouldn't say I like him more than the guy right below him, Zach Wheeler, who's $1,200 cheaper, and just personally, I haven't projected higher than Walker Buehler tonight, so why not just take the savings there? Now, you can easily play both together. I shouldn't say easily. You can definitely play both together if you find enough value bets. But I was playing around some dummy lineups, and it is possible tonight. But if I had to pick between one or the other today, I would start with Wheeler just because he's a lot more inexpensive, and you can just fit in a couple of extra bets in your lineup. And there's a lower implied team total against him at 3.48. Pretty heavy favorite, 6.5K prop, and Washington's team right now is pretty decimated. They lost Yan Gomes, Josh Harrison, Starlin Castro. There's no Trey Turner anymore. It's kind of a watered-down lineup for the most part. Yes, Juan Soto is there, and Andrew Stevenson hasn't been terrible, but I'm still betting on Zach Wheeler being one of the best pitching options on today's slate, and I think that will reflect in the ownership as well. But he's been excellent all season long. I know his last start versus Washington wasn't exactly amazing. I'm going to say he scored around 16 points in that game, but he's got a 2.78 xFIP on the season, 3.12 SIERA, 29.8% K rate. One of my favorite things about Zach Wheeler is that he limits the power pretty much each and every single start. I mean, he's given up less than a 90 ISO. I know he gave up a homer in this last game, but 50% ground ball rate, about a half a homer per nine, only a 22% hard contact rate. I'm assuming Zach Wheeler will be the chalkiest pitcher on the slate, but I think for cash games, it is the right move today. And then Sean Manaea, $9,400. He could be a good tournament pivot off of Zach Wheeler. Now, the matchup here versus the Padres, it's pretty gross if you're looking at their splits versus lefties this season. Only a 22.2% K rate and your 11% walk rate, 153 Tim ISO, which isn't too up there, but a 315 WOBA, 99 WRC plus. But the main appeal here is that Tatis is not in the lineup right now, which he's obviously one of the best players in baseball. He crushes left-handed pitching, so it is a big boost for a guy like Sean Manaea here. In the past 2 starts for him, he's scored around 35 fantasy points, so he's in excellent form recently, 9 and 13 strikeouts in those respective starts. Now, if we're looking at his overall splits this year, a 3.39 xFIP, 3.5 SIERA, 27.2% carry, limits the walks, limits the power, gets a decent amount of ground balls, and limits the hard contact. So I think Manaea would be a nice pivot off of Zach Wheeler. Now, obviously, you could play both in the same lineup, but if you had to pick between the two in cash games, I prefer Wheeler. If you want to get a little bit different in tournaments, you could go Manaea the way he's been pitching recently, and it's also a very pitcher-friendly park over in Oakland. There's no implied team total out yet right now, but if I had to guess, the Padres will probably be in the probably like the mid threes if I had to guess. I'm not sure I'd get quite to 4. Mid to upper threes would be my assumption there, but they could surprise us and go a little bit lower than that, but I don't think it'll be lower than the Nationals versus Zach Wheeler tonight. Then you say Kikuchi, $8,800, another decent tournament play here versus Tampa. One of the best places to pitch in all of baseball in Tampa Bay in the Trop. I know there's a 4.5 implied team total here, but I'm mainly just chasing the strikeout upside because I know the Tampa Bay Rays, they're a team that have plenty of power, and it's always dangerous using pitchers versus them. But they're a team that'll strike out quite a bit, specifically versus lefties, where they own around a 27% K rate versus left-handed pitching this season. Their ISO is also only 153 to lefties compared to 181 to righties, 299 WOBA and 92 WRC plus. So I think Kikuchi in this spot as a lefty in a very pitcher-friendly park is actually a pretty solid option here. On the season, I know his ERA is above 4, but he has a nice 3.37 xFIP, 26.7% K rate. Does give up a little bit of pop, but I think he'll be a decent option here today and does get a good amount of ground balls, and he limits the power for the most part. Does give up a lot of homers, but as far as hard contact goes, 31.5% hard contact rate, and I think pitching the Trop will certainly help him out, so I think he's a pretty solid tournament option today. Same goes for Ryu, $8,700. He's definitely more of a boring option here, but just from a run prevention standpoint, he faces a really bad Cleveland team right now, which I know they took the loss versus Cleveland yesterday, but overall, this lineup is really bad outside of a couple bats like Franmil Reyes and Jose Ramirez. Like at the bottom of the lineup, you got guys like Ernie Clement and a few guys you probably never even heard of. I just know he's a boring pitcher, so it never feels great rostering Ryu, but if he can go the 5+ innings, maybe give up a run or two and get a handful of strikeouts, which is kind of what Vegas is projecting to happen, I think he could get you around 15-20 points, which isn't going to kill you today. But he's only got a 20% carry. He limits the walks, though, but he has been giving up some power this season, 175 ISO, but only a 27.6% hard contact rate with 1.1 homers per 9. And as bad as this Cleveland team is right now, I think he's a fine option here with the xFIP and SIERA, both around the upper 3s to low 4s. And then dropping to Taijuan Walker here, $8,500. He has been very, very terrible for the past, 4 or 5 starts now, so if you're betting on recent form, Taijuan Walker is not your guy, but this is a fantastic matchup versus Miami. I know Tyler McGill struggled yesterday where he gave up a grand slam to Lewis Brinson, of all people, in the first inning. It looked like he was going to get absolutely imploded and ruin the slate. Fortunately enough, he kind of righted the ship after that, only gave up a run off I believe, an Isan Diaz double, I want to say, at one point. Then he got a handful of strikeouts. But every single pitcher yesterday kind of ended up sucking. Heaney had 5 points. McGill ended up with 7.9 or something like that. DeSclafani ended up getting 6. So pitching was not a big deal. And it's kind of what I mentioned in the slate where I said I don't think pitching's going to win us the slate. I think it's going to be all about the bats. And well, it was all about the bats yesterday. So I'm glad it's kind of how it worked out because I had all my pitchers ended up scoring 5 points besides my one Dunning lineup. But the bats are what got me there because I had a lot of Giants, Orioles, and Diamondbacks and Brewers stacks. I know the Yankees suck, but talk about the Yankees in a little bit actually. But anyway, Taijuan Walker here, lowest implied team total on the slate against him, 3.28, very heavy favorite, 5K prop. I know his numbers have been awful recently. Beginning of the season, he was pitching very, very well. Now, I will say his ERA was always a lot lower than his xFIP and SIERA, so regression was due, and it's been kind of hitting him like a truck. But at this point, we're kind of evening out, where his ERA is around 3.7, but his xFIP's now 4.2, 4.3 SIERA. So we're kind of getting leveled out here, but it's mainly just a bet on facing one of the worst offenses in baseball right now. The Marlins lineup is horrendous. They used to have Duvall, Marte. I say this every single slate. They're gone, and they have some really bad players in that lineup right now. If you look at the bottom of the lineup, it is gross. So low implied team total makes sense here. One of the best places to pitch in all of baseball in Miami. So if you're just trying to get a good matchup play, Taijuan Walker is your guy, although he does not excite me too much. And then Dylan Cease for $100 cheaper. He faces a pretty I don't want to say a super weak Royals team, but they're really not that great. I know they've got a couple good bats in their lineup, like Salvador Perez and a couple of other guys that have some power, but they lost Jorge Soler and really, besides Perez, I'm not overly concerned about anybody in the lineup. Yeah, Whit Merrifield's a good hitter, but he doesn't really hit for a ton of power. And on the season, Dylan Cease is boasting a 29.3% carry, which of all these pitchers, that's only below Zach Wheeler here. That's actually more than Walker Buehler, Sean Manaea, and Yusei Kikuchi. So at that price point, only a 3.53 implied team total against him. He's a very heavy favorite. I think the White Sox stack looks pretty good tonight versus Bubic. I think Cease could be an interesting play here. Maybe not in cash games, although I wouldn't hate it if you went to him in cash games. But I think in tournaments, he's definitely a pretty solid option here. He limits the power, limits the hard contact, limits the homers, and if we're looking at these splits for the Royals this season versus righties, they don't really strike out too much, but the other numbers are pretty poor overall. Only a 144 team ISO, 89 WRC plus, and a 302 WOBA, so $8,400. I think Dylan Cease is an interesting option because of that price point. But as far as pitching goes, I think that's pretty much it here. I know we have quite a few guys listed, but with it being such a large slate, there's quite a few players to talk about, but I think we can move right over to the bats now. As far as the bats go, there's quite a few good offenses on today's slate, so there's definitely going to be quite a few good stacks to talk about. And as far as how we're going to break down bats, we're going to do the stacks once again. I know we used to do the position by position breakdown, but you guys really seem to enjoy how we did stacks yesterday, which is the most important thing in baseball when you're playing MLB DFS, especially in tournaments. You're going to want to stack offenses, so I think it makes more sense to do it this way and make it more efficient. Also, if you want the position by position breakdown, do a cheat sheet each and every single day. And as far as the stacks go, I have a top stack still, which does it by projections, point per dollar wise, the average salary of everybody in the lineup, and things like that. I do find it very, very useful. But anyway, we'll start with our favorite stack of the night. We have the New York Yankees once again. I know they kind of killed us yesterday, but I'm going to go right back to the well here. No pun intended, versus Alex Wells, who's not a very good pitcher. I would say he's definitely a step down below of Jorge Lopez. I know Jorge Lopez, he's not that great of a pitcher, but he's not absolutely horrendous. And I was kind of worried the Yankees were going to lay an egg, and they did. I still have plenty of Yankees in my lineup, especially in cash games. Fortunately, it ended up working out because we had a couple of other Giants and Diamondbacks and things like that in our lineups. But man, the Yankees were rough yesterday. They were getting no hit for quite some time. I know they scored a run, but they were still getting no hit. I want to say until like the 6th or 7th inning. Hopefully that does not happen once again today, which I'd be very surprised if it does. They have a team total above 6 as a hitter-friendly park in New York. And Alex Wells, looking at his splits this season, the guy has really not been that great. And there's definitely quite a few Yankees bats, especially the righties that I think make plenty of sense here. So his numbers on the season, it's a very, very small sample size, but he's got a 5.3 ERA, and if you thought that was bad, his xFIP's even worse at 6, only a 16% K rate, giving up a 186 ISO and a 45% hard contact rate. So you can use pretty much everybody in the lineup here because I can't imagine he's going to last too long. I know people might shy away from the lefties and lefty on lefty matchups, but if you like the Yankee stack today and you think they're going to get to Alex Wells, you're assuming he's not lasting too long in the game. So they'll see some righties at some point, and then at that point, you're probably thinking, well, I wish I had some more Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo in my lineups. Mostly, I do prefer the righties here, guys like DJ LeMahieu, Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton. Gleyber Torres is kind of more of a fill-in guy. He needs to be a little bit cheaper because he has hit for 0 power this season. He's got less than a 100 ISO, so I feel kind of gross paying over $4,000 for Torres, especially since he hits lower in the order. But if you're just like full stack in the Yanks, he's fine, but he's definitely not one of my favorite plays. Kyle Higashioka, $3,100. I could see him being a good cash game catcher tonight at that price point. Now, Wilson Contreras is going to be the guy you're going to want to try to fit in. He gets a nice ready and lefty matchup in Coors Field, which we will talk about the Cubs very, very shortly here. But Shioka, $3,100. His batting average has been terrible this season, but he does have over a 225 ISO, so just cheap power, ready on lefty matchup versus Alex Wells. But I like pretty much the entire lineup here. As far as cash games go, guys like Aaron Judge or Giancarlo Stanton are going to be kind of staples. You don't have to play Judge, but I think Stanton, specifically at $4,100, ready on lefty matchup, he crushes left-handed pitching for power. He's going to be one of those guys you're probably going to try to fit in for cash games. I know the Yankees kind of killed us last night, but if that's going to lower their ownership even a little bit, I'll be more than happy to play them once again because at some point here, they're going to pop off here versus the Orioles, and it's a really good matchup versus Alex Wells tonight. Moving on to one of my other favorite stacks today, we have the Chicago Cubs on the road versus Kyle Freeland in Coors Field, which anytime you're in Coors Field, you're always going to have some interest because it is by far the best place to hit in all of baseball. The high altitude just makes that ball fly, and the thing I like the most about the Cubs here is not only that they're in Coors Field, but their prices are really not that bad. Like Rafael Ortega, who's been white hot, he's below $3,000. Yes, Contreras is very expensive, but outside of Contreras, I mean, you can get a couple cheap righties here for $4,400, $2,700, $2,600, the bare minimum at $2,000. And at the very end, we have Alcantara here at $2,900. So this is a pretty cheap core stack, and I realize they lost pretty much all their best players in Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, and Javier Baez, but I mean, you can still use a very cheap stack here because Kyle Freeland is not a good pitcher. I think we all know that. Now, at the beginning of the season, he was absolute garbage and a complete dumpster fire. He's kind of got a little bit better, but it's Coors Field. I think we can use pretty much all these cubbies here. Do not be scared of the lefty-on-lefty matchup for Rafael Ortega. The guy's been playing very, very well. Kyle Freeland can still get hit by lefties. And if you're stacking the Cubs, you're assuming Kyle Freeland doesn't last too long in the game. Because if Freeland's lasting long in the game, that means he's probably pitching pretty well. So you're assuming you won't be in the game too long. And the Rockies bullpen is one of the absolute worst in the league. They have a team xFIP close to 5. So he'll see some really bad righties at some point here. So I still like Ortega in tournaments. Do not skip over him just because you're scared of a lefty-on-lefty matchup. He should be just fine. Wilson Contreras has plenty of power versus lefties. He's going to be one of the top overall options on the entire slate. I was looking at projections, and he's near the very top for me today. I know he's a little bit expensive, but if you're full stack in the Cubs, I really recommend trying to get Contreras in. And if you're playing cash games and you can afford an expensive catcher, I really like Contreras tonight. Ian Happ's fine. He's a switch hitter, but he's got power versus lefties. Patrick Wisdom, he's got a lot of power versus lefties. The guy will strike out quite a bit, but Kyle Freeland, not really a big strikeout pitcher, so batting cleanup here, at least projected to, should be a good option. Same goes for David Bote, one of the highest owned players in the entire slate. Like, if you're playing cash games today, I'd have a hard time not playing David Bote. Eligible at second base and third base, and at that price point, that's got a little bit of pop versus lefties. I think he's an excellent option here. $2,700. I think you got to play him in cash games. Matt Duffy, just a cheap righty-lefty matchup here. Frank Schwindel, I mean, he has very limited plate appearances this season, but he's the absolute bare minimum here. So if you need $2,000 to fit in like Walker Buehler and Zach Wheeler today, it's very easily attainable if you are full stack in the Cubs today because these price points are very, very low. Moving on to a team we liked quite a bit yesterday, and they did end up popping off. I fell asleep when the game was 8-8, so I forgot to look at the final score, but it was definitely one of the best games of the night to target. Chris Bryant had a decent game, but Alex Dickerson kind of broke the slate a little bit with a grand slam and a triple. He ended up having a fantastic game. Yastrzemski went deep. I believe Wilmer Flores ended up going deep. It was a very solid game for fantasy purposes on both sides because the Diamondbacks ended up popping off as well. But I do like the Giants here. They have quite a few guys that do hit left-handed pitching pretty well. And the addition of Chris Bryant's obviously going to boost that quite a bit because we always like that guy versus lefties. And Addison Bumgarner, he is a guy that will struggle with some right-handed bats. And we have guys like Austin Slater here leading off $3,000. He's got some decent splits versus lefties. Chris Bryant, the obvious option here. If you're stacking the Giants, you cannot leave off the new face of Chris Bryant. He crushes left-handed pitching. And Madison Bumgarner, like I said, he's the guy we want righties against. Mike Yastrzemski, it's a lefty-lefty matchup here. I always say if you're stacking against a pitcher, you're assuming he's not going to last too long here. So at some point, they should be able to see a righty in the bullpen. And the Diamondbacks bullpen is really not that great. It's actually got a pretty poor team xFIP overall. So Yastrzemski in a lefty-lefty matchup, I actually think is a pretty good tournament play here because people will skip over him. But if you just want to do the 1 through 5 Giant stack, I have no problem at all just leaving him on there because at some point he will end up seeing a righty and he should have some lower ownership. Darren Roof, $3,900, some decent splits versus lefties, and Brendan Crawford. Kind of the same exact thing as Mike Yastrzemski where it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, but I'm not going to be overly concerned about that because at some point he should see a righty. Wilmer Flores, $3,800. He's specifically a guy I like using versus left-handed pitching. He's always had some strong numbers versus them, so I don't think Flores is a bad play whatsoever. You can play him at second base and third base. And the very bottom of this lineup is pretty much just lineup fillers. Kirk Casale at $2,700 is the catcher, so he's going to be viable if you just need a cheap option. Cheap right-handed matchup there, so I don't hate the idea of that. But I do think the Giants with the team total of 5.31, they do look pretty solid today. I know beginning of the season, Madison Bumgarner actually looked like he turned back the clock a little bit, but recently he has not been that great. And just a couple more teams I'm looking to target tonight. So one of them is going to be the White Sox here versus Chris Bubich. I know last time they faced them, it went very, very poorly. They kind of got mowed down for the most part, but I'm going to go right back to them because they overall do hit left-handed pitching pretty well. Guys like Tim Anderson, Cesar Hernandez, Jose Abreu, Yoan Moncada, Eloy Jimenez, Andrew Vaughn are all in play for me. Even the bottom of the order is playable. Adam Engel, Garcia, and Sebi Zavala, who pretty much broke the slate on Saturday. I think that's when it was, when he had 3 homers, a grand slam. I mean, I think he scored like 50-something DraftKings points. It was insane. Obviously, you can never expect that again, but he's dirt cheap at $2,300 if you do need a cheap catch today. But Tim Anderson, he hasn't actually been that great versus lefties this season. He's got like a 66% ground ball rate versus them, and the batting average has actually been worse because on the season he's batting .304, but versus lefties, I believe it's 281 with a .303 WOBA, 112 ISO, 93 WRC plus, and a 66% ground ball rate, which is not pretty at all. But Cesar Hernandez, 250 ISO to lefties this season. Jose Abreu, a 337 ISO. I prefer Moncada versus righties, but if you are full stack in the White Sox, kind of hard to leave off the guy batting cleanup. Eloy Jimenez has pretty much had barely any at-bats for it to register anything, but he does have pop versus lefties. He's also been day-to-day since, I believe, July 28th, but I think we're supposed to get him back today. We'll have to see how that goes, but assuming he's back in the lineup, the price is back up there at $4,300. He's no longer free, but he still hits lefties fine, and he's just a nice part of that full-on White Sox stack. And Andrew Vaughn over a 300 ISO this season versus left-handed pitching, so I think the White Sox stack does look pretty solid today. Are they my favorite stack in the slate? No, not really, but they have a nice matchup versus Bubich, and they do a team total of 5.5 today, so I think these guys do grade out pretty well. Although I will say it's not the cheapest stack in the world, and it's a bit pricey, especially if you're rostering guys like Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu. But the other guys are not terribly expensive, but they are a little bit up there. Last team we're going to talk about here is the Milwaukee Brewers versus Max Kranick. I believe that's how you pronounce his name, but he hasn't had a big sample size of pitching this year, but so far it hasn't exactly been that great. If you want to look at his splits overall on the season, again, smaller sample size, so I hate to put too much into it, but he's got a 7.3 ERA, 5.06 xFIP, a strikeout rate below 20%, not really walking too many guys, 170 ISO, 37% hard contact rate, not many homers, but again, smaller sample sizes here, but I think we can pretty much use all the Brewers. I know last night the stack was sucking for the large majority of the day, like probably 90% of the game, but at the very end, ended up popping off around 6 to 8 runs. I know Escobar got a triple, then he had a homer. So if you had Escobar, you were pretty happy. I want to say he ended up with around 34, 35 fantasy points, but all these guys are pretty much in play here. It's a hitter-friendly park in Milwaukee. They have a team total above 5.3. Colton Wong, get the lefty-righty matchup. I think he's an excellent play. Willie Adames, very expensive, but he has been hitting for some power. Ever since he moved to Milwaukee, he's been playing very, very well, over a 200 ISO on the season. Omar Narvaez is always a great option versus righties, betting over 300 versus them. Eduardo Escobar, the new addition here from Arizona, $5,300. He's actually hit for quite a bit of power this season, at 236 ISO, and he showed you the upside that he has last night when he scored over 30 fantasy points. Roddy Tellez, $3,000. He is dirt cheap with some pop versus righties, and he actually hasn't been playing that bad recently. So if you just want a cheap first baseman tonight, I think Tellez at $3,000 is fine in cash games or pretty much any single format today. Avisail Garcia, $300. I prefer him versus lefties, but on the season he does have over a 200 ISO and he has hit righties fine. So I think at that price point, he's a pretty solid option here, even though he's a little bit lower in the order. Then Tyrone Taylor, Lorenzo Cain, I prefer those guys versus lefties, but they're kind of just lineup fillers at the end. If you want to get kind of different, I can't imagine they'll get too much ownership. So if you just want to use the guys lower in the stack, like you could do a 4-man Rowdy Tellez, Garcia, Taylor, and Cain stack, I wouldn't be against it. It's also a bit cheaper, but obviously I prefer like the 1 through 5 rather than getting like the 5 through 8 here. So, but I think that's going to be pretty much it for the video. So I do hope it was helpful. And if it was, make sure you leave a like on the video. It really does help me out. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. Follow me over on social media. I'm at ChrisPennell16 on Twitter and CPen16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, get access to some extra content. Link is down below in the description for that. I got my projections, my optimizer, rankings, my cheat sheet, top stacks tool, my pitcher sheet, hitters, projections, all that fun stuff. Discord community. Link can be found down below. And don't forget this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections and props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. It's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you to either prizepicks.com or use the link down below. But I think that's pretty much it for the video, guys. Hope it was helpful. I will stop rambling and hope you guys enjoy your Tuesday.